Hello and welcome to this panel discussion on mobility. I'm Emma Loxton, a partner in McKinsey, and we've got a fantastic panel lineup for you today. As you'll be aware, there are some major shifts underway in mobility. So things that we have seen in the market around autonomy and connectedness, electrification, shared mobility, smart mobility. And of course, all of this happens against the backdrop of the pandemic and the drive to net zero. Here today to explore the future of mobility and share their perspectives are Anne-Laure de Chamard, the Managing Director of Energy Solutions International at ENGIE, and Catherine Guillard, Chairwoman and CEO of RATP, who are in the studio in Paris. And on Zoom with me here is Andy Byford, the Commissioner of Transport for London. So welcome to the panel and thank you for joining us. Perhaps if I start with you, Andy, and just a bit about, what Transport for London's role is in mobility, and in particular, how you've seen the pandemic impact on mobility.
Sure. Well, thank you, Emma. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. London calling. We're all over the transition really to a more sustainable future here in London. It's been my pleasure to head up Transport for London now since June of 2020, and I've taken over an organisation that in many ways is quite traditional in that we run the tube, we run rail, we've got buses, we've got the river bus, and all the various other modes. It's an integrated transport system. But equally, what's exciting is that we're, I think, quite at the cutting edge under our Mayor, Sadiq Khan. We're really at the cutting edge of looking for more sustainable options, exploring all sorts of ways in which to meet the Mayor's very clear challenge. And he's set the target that he wants 80% of travel in London to be sustainable. And by that, we mean walking, cycling, or on public transport by 2041. And we're making good progress towards that. One thing the pandemic has given us is an opportunity really to expedite what would probably have otherwise taken a long time. So we've really been pushing on with the installation of bike lanes, with the exploration of new modes, scooters, all sorts of environmental initiatives. We just launched the world's first expanded ultra-low emission zone, which is already having a positive impact on London's.
Perhaps if I go to you, Catherine, and you could just talk to us a bit about how this is playing out in Paris. What's changing and what's not changing as a result of the pandemic.
I think the first thing to say is regarding the negative change, we have a demand shock, i.e., with the pandemics, we are three factors which are today very significant for us. The first one is remote working. Obviously, the pandemic changed totally the matter here. Before COVID, we were at 1 day in average. Now it's 3 days in average. And this has a significant impact on the demand, i.e., let's say between 7 and 9%. And the second one is tourism. Obviously, the tourism is not getting well. It's starting again, but very slowly. And this is the second impact that we have on the demand. And the third shock is coming from the internet. And just to give you a flavor, between summer 20 and summer 21, the retail sales increased by 4%, internet sales increased by 11%. So all in all, what we have today, we have factorized this in a model at the RATP Group, and we think that midterm, this could have an impact of 10%. But today, in Paris, we are still at minus 20%. And by the way, I think Andy could probably, let's say, confirm that it's quite a decent level, 80% today, vis-a-vis some European capital. So on that one, we have a shock of demand, a shock of trust, and it's for that we have worked intensively with our authority of transport. We managed to get investment in the sanitary in order to get the trust of the people to, let's say, move with us in good security. And I would say that the sanitary issue is now proving that with a lot of experience, a lot of experiments on the network, we are not a place of contamination in public transport, because since the beginning, 96% of the people wear the mask. They are not talking, and there is a renewal of fresh air, which is quite, let's say, significant and often. So this has changed significantly. The second thing is obviously the new mobility, which has increased. And as RATP, we have RATP Capital Innovation. We invest in this new mobility. Just to give you a figure, 4.5 million trips last year with us, with our partnership in Paris. So, and I would say that what has not changed is the absolute imperative to develop public transportation, because the COVID was a disaster, plus 5% in cars, in autosolism, versus minus 5% in the public transport. I could tell you this is not good for the environment. So I think this is for the, let's say, the negative part. The positive one is that it is still true that when you take public transportation, the gas emission is 60 less than in cars. So we need absolutely to continue to invest. All the countries did that. We did it in Paris. Obviously, I could come back on that later, but Joe Biden decided a 20 billion program for public transportation. This is the case in Canada, in Ontario, in Quebec. There are billions of investment there. I know that it is also the case in Singapore, where we want to be present. So I think it's a unique opportunity to drive through the investment into the system, and let's say to find an exit, which is for a better world tomorrow that we are today.
Thank you, Catherine. And perhaps if I could bring Andy back in, I think the tech issues have been resolved. How do you, I mean, Catherine was talking there a bit about, how they're seeing the decline in demand in Paris. How do you see the new normal for mobility on the other side of the pandemic, if and when we ever get there, in London?
Sure. Well, look, sorry about the IT problems. We've just switched over to another server. So, well, just a quick bit about what's happened in London first, and then I'll come on to where we see the modelling. This is unprecedented. We dropped at one point to levels of ridership on the tube, the London Underground, not seen since Victorian times. So we dropped to 5% of normal, and on the buses was around 20% of normal. So, that's had a huge catastrophic impact on our finances, because we're so dependent on fares through the fare box. So obviously, if you lose your riders, it stands to reason you lose your revenue. But on the way back, we're about now blended between surface travel like buses and surface rail and the tube. It's about 60% of normal. But it's plateaued, and it's plateaued because people aren't really coming back now en masse to offices. Where people are coming back to offices, it tends to be, say, 3 days a week, Tuesdays through Thursdays. We are seeing heavy ridership or big growth in ridership in the evenings, but we're not seeing the international travellers. So where we had thought that we could get back to 80% of normal ridership by, say, probably the beginning of the new financial year, so April, I think we're probably going to stick at around 65% for some time. So, that's obviously a challenge for us in terms of the finances. But again, as I was saying before I got cut off, it does open up other opportunities. We're seeing huge growth in the number of people using bikes, scooters, and we're embracing all of those technologies. In fact, we're running our own e-scooter trial to make sure that where people are using scooters, they're doing so safely. So I always say in adversity comes opportunity, and we're certainly trying to make the best of a pretty scary thing.
Thank you, Andy. And I mean, you touched a bit on some of the new mobility modes and the requirements around, e-scooters and how do we make those safe. I'm also conscious there's quite a big energy requirement as we make a transition to new forms of mobility. Perhaps, Anne-Laure, I could ask you to come in on how you see the future of mobility from the energy perspective.
Yes, thank you. So actually, you're right, and the whole, I guess the whole COVID crisis showed also the importance of the planet, of having a really accelerating the movement around the energetic transition, and that is exactly what is needed for transport. As you all know, the transport sector accounts for almost, it's the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. It accounts for almost 25%. Globally. And so in order to be able to meet the net zero by 2050, we actually have to go very fast and to accelerate, and we need to cut by 20% the emissions before 2030. And so for this, we are actually seeing a huge push towards electrification. Overall, the electric vehicle sales have been going down with the COVID crisis, as normal, as expected. But despite from that, EV vehicles have gone up by 40% last year. There's a huge push. 50% of the sales of the e-vehicles were electric in Norway, 10% in France, 10% in Germany. There's a huge push. And for this, we will need to move fast. We estimate that there will be 300 million electric vehicle cars by 2030, which is really 30 times the number that we have today. And it's interesting because when we look at what's happening for e-mobility, it's exactly what happened for the renewable energy a few years ago. We have the same mechanism. We have strong government subsidies that are entering in. We have, like we had for the exit of coal, we are starting to have a prohibition of thermal engines that are coming in. So 2030 in the UK, 2040 in France. We know that by 2035, there will be no thermal engine vehicles sold anymore. Like for renewables, we have skyrocketing valuation of the companies that are the first movers, that are fast movers. We've seen that last year, Tesla's share price tripled, Ford's share price doubled. Like these first movers are going big in terms of valuation by the market, exactly the same way as we had a few years ago with renewables. And finally, there's tons of financing out there. Investment funds are investing big time. That BlackRock invested 700 million to finance the extension of EV charging infrastructure in Europe. 20% of the green bonds that are issued are in the transport sector, which is $50 billion. So there's tons of funds out there to finance this transition of the mobility. But apart from the electric mobility, this will not be enough because this is perfect for urban mobility. But for all the distances that are bigger than 300 kilometers, we will need other means. And this is where hydrogen comes in. And this is important for long distance, for heavy mobility, and there's a lot of things to do there. It will be applied for buses, for rail, for aviation, for the maritime transport, and ENGIE is working a lot with different partners on that because we think there's a lot to do in the longer term, and we expect this market to be huge. You all know that there's been a lot of government pledges on all that. $70 billion were announced of public subsidy on that. It's expected to, go. The hydrogen demand is supposed to skyrocket and to be multiplied by 5 by 2050. So it's a huge second trend apart from the electrification. And for that, we will need to invest in a lot of infrastructure to be able to finance that and to invent new business models to be able to make this economically viable, because today it's not the case, it's not yet mature, and we have to go very fast.
And perhaps, Catherine, you might pick up on this point around new business models, because I'm sure at RATP you're, in the midst of, how do we think about sustainable transport? What's the kind of technology as we transition our fleet? So how do you think about the business models that we have today versus what you'll need to actually build a sustainable transport model?
Yeah, the business model is totally reshuffling, in fact, because we have in France, for instance, 2.3 billion of losses in 2 years for the public transportation. It was 1.6 like last year and 700 this year. I.e., we are in a situation where we invest a lot. Just RATP will invest 8.4 billion in the next 4 years, i.e. between 40 and 45% of our sales. This is linked to the contract that we have with Île-de-France Mobility. We will reshuffle, for instance, totally the fleet of the bus in Paris, i.e. we will change 3,700 buses. It's already in course. It's a 1.6 billion program, converting all the depot to electricity or biogas. I concur with what Anne said, i.e. The reality here is that the first wave is electrification. On hydrogen, we work already, but the reality is that the infrastructure are not ready. Sorry, but when I talk about a depot of bus, it's for instance, 190 buses, and I could tell you converted already in biogas or electricity, what we are doing. We have 25 depots in Paris, and we have already converted 8 of them, and 11 are in, in working progress. It's a huge industrial conversion. And I think hydrogen will come next. And in order to deliver that, we need to have a very high level of, electrification, notably in EU and in France. But in France, we are more favorably, positioned due to nuclear. So for us, there is a triangle. Increase the investment in order to be sure that obviously metro, tramways are already in electricity, but we are changing the rolling stock. RATP is changing 65% of its rolling stock, doing huge contract with suppliers like CAF, Bombardier, Alstom, obviously, in the next 12 years. Plus the depot, plus the bus, it's an industrial revolution that we are in. Okay, revolution also in the maintenance with application of intelligence application, for instance, in the applicative maintenance, predictive, IoT, all this is in course. So huge investment, but at the same time, as Andy mentioned, still we are at this level of traffic. We have a super problem of revenues. And for that, it's effectively true that we need public, sustainability and funds. And again, we are working for the common good. I think that if we want to have a clean city, it's already said by Anor, but 70% of the gas emission is coming from the city. And inside the city, the main issue of pollution is transport and a little bit tertiary building, okay, but the main issue is pollution. By the way, there is something that we need to add to that is the competition for the public space. When we put 1.6 million people in a RER, it's the equivalent of a highway of 12 runway by side, i.e. 24 highway, in fact. So the fact that we develop PTC is also something which is important because there is a scarcity of space, of public space in the cities. And obviously the multiplication of mobility needs to be managed. And I could tell you in some cities, it's already complicated. We have 15,000 objects, new mobility in Paris. It's equivalent at Berlin today. And we are shareholder of City Scoot, of Communauto, who is car sharing, electric scooter, bike. All this stuff need to be at one point in time managed in the city. And one of the key elements of public transportation, it is the volume that we are able to get there without this problem of space, because obviously the space is, let's say, well framed at the origin, and the volume that we are able to manage are very, very high and very good for the planet. So I'm pretty confident on the future of PTC. We have just a bad, let's say, moment to convey in front of us for, let's say, maybe the time of the COVID. But we adapt, we innovate a lot. You talk about connectivity. We for instance renew completely our mobile app. We bought last year Mappy, and we are able to have a first real mobility as a service in Paris. I.e., you book, you pay, and you go with our application. And I think these encapsulate the new mobility and the public transportation, which is for me in the dense, super dense area, the good fit and the good equation to try to get.
Thank you, Catherine. And perhaps, Andy, I might bring you in on this. There was quite a lot in there, but perhaps on the role of there was quite a lot in there, but perhaps on the investment and the public use of space, and how you're thinking about that in the context of London and Transport for London.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm sorry about all these problems we're having. Third time lucky, hopefully. I just caught the tail end of what Catherine was saying, and very similar issues here in London in terms of massive push to electrify our bus fleet. We're also looking at hydrogen, by the way. But in terms of use of space, it's a very hot topic here because at the end of the day, London is founded on originally a medieval city. So we do have to share the road. A lot of the roads are pretty narrow, but we are finding ways in which to accommodate both public transport, those cars that still need to stay on the road, but to put in bike lanes, to put in widened pavements, so that we can meet that mayoral objective of 80% of walking, cycling and riding on public transport by 2041. And in terms of private investment, I mean, TfL is in an unusual position, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, about being so reliant on public funding through the fare box. We need to get off that model. If there's one thing this pandemic has taught us, is that model really is broken. So I want us to move to a more sustainable funding model, one that will ideally see TfL be self-sufficient for operating expenses. Capital, we will need government assistance with capital, but my pitch to government is, well, that helps you meet your objectives. You want a jobs-led recovery, we can help with that. We've got plenty of projects. You want a decarbonised UK by 2050? Well, you don't get that without a decarbonised transport system. Same as Catherine said, transport itself generates a lot of carbon. And then thirdly, you want a leveled up UK. Well, we spend most of our capital money around the country. So I'm kind of agnostic in some ways about where the money comes from. Definitely private development money and private sector expertise is something we're very alive to and very open to. I think, again, as I said earlier, that's one thing this pandemic has done. It's meant that we're open more quickly, more in a more fleet of foot manner to new ideas and new technologies.
And Laura, how do you think about the role of the energy providers in providing the infrastructure and support to public sector transport in the transition to sustainability?
So, as Catherine was saying, before, when we're thinking of EV mobility, the first concern of the customers was, wow, the price of the vehicle, is it going to be, are we going to have a driving range that is sufficient, etc. Today, it's not the case anymore at all. Today, the real issue is, will we have enough charging infrastructure? Will we have enough charging points? Because otherwise, I'm not going to invest in this if I cannot recharge or if it's going to be too much of a hassle to get there. So this is why we have to accelerate a lot. And what we see today is that worldwide, we're talking about 100 million charging points needed by 2030, which means 200 billion investment. This is huge. And we will need the help of public and private sectors for that. And if we're looking at the private area, and actually in the UK, where Andy is, we're also talking about another shift, which is Prime Minister last week, I think Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that all the new homes and all the office buildings we're going to have, starting by in 2025, we're going to have to be charged with electric charging infrastructure within these buildings. And this, I know, will trickle down everywhere in Europe and elsewhere. So there is this huge shift coming up. And for us, there's a need of building infrastructures, but there's also a need of bringing the green energy to these charging points. And for this, we need to produce this energy. And today, we don't have enough. This means building a lot of renewables. We think that the additional demand for electricity coming from e-mobility by 2030 is the equivalent of the annual consumption of Sweden. So we will have to build a lot of renewable infrastructure for that. Then the second problem is that once you've produced the energy, you have to transport it to the charging stations. And today, in many countries, for example, in the US, the energy is produced in the Midlands, but your need will be everywhere, especially on the coasts. So for this, you need the power transport network, the transmission network, which is not sufficient today. So a lot of investment will be needed there as well. And then in the end, once you get to the charging station, you will also need to add all the smart grid, the innovation and the digitalization that you will need to in order to deal with the consumption. Because if everyone is charging their vehicle at the same time and using it at the same time, we will have peaks that will be impossible to deal with. So we will need to put some smart grid system where you can leverage this consumption along the time in a smart way. So all this is going to be very important in terms of infrastructure and technology. For hydrogen, we have the exact same issues, building the hydrogen infrastructure. And it's also a question of, chicken and egg problem, where today it is absolutely not economically viable. But the problem is that in order to make it economically viable, we need scale, we need volume. And the more we will have hydrogen vehicles, the cheaper it will become. The more we will have hydrogen production, the cheaper the electrolyzers will become, the cheaper, etc. And so it is, a chicken and egg problem that we have to solve. And for that, we will need public subsidies. So, to summarize this issue, we think that there's a need for huge infrastructure, a lot more production of green energy, and a complete revamping of the power network system.
Thank you, Anne-Laure. I think, Andy, perhaps if I come back to you on this one, I think what we're talking about here is an industrial revolution, to use the phrase Katrine was using earlier, that requires a change in the energy usage, the energy mix, and the infrastructure that's required for a city. And so to look purely at our transport systems becomes harder and harder as we think about the energy transition. So I'd just be interested in your perspective in how Transport for London is thinking about the energy usage that it has. I think we may have lost Andy. Have we still got Andy?
So Emma, I caught most of that. I don't know what's going on out there. I think I caught the gist of the question. So just phrase it for me again, just highlight it.
Transport used to be kind of petrol and diesel. We're now moving to energy. How do you think about bringing transport together with energy and the transition? I think we may have to come back to Andy on that question. Catherine, perhaps I could come to you, because as an operator, you're going to face the same issue around the transition of your infrastructure.
Yeah, in fact, we have an ambitious target at the RATP Group because we want to halve by 50% our gas emission. Today, the gas emission of RATP is 74% on the bus, because obviously the rest is our maintenance and our tertiary building. The rest is already electric. And if I want to do that, I need to convert, as I explained, the bus depot and obviously find the good bus at a good price in order to move in. This seems simple, but it is not. In order to be really operating, my bus depot need to have 150, 190 bus rechargeable in one night in various, let's say, plug in 4 hours, and being able to do 190 kilometers per day. Let's be concrete, okay? And this is an obligation. We work with partner, with GDRF and Enedis, in order to get the electricity there. And I just want to make one additional thing to what I know just before. We will have to manage regulation. I could tell you it's a nightmare in terms of regulations to operate in biogas. And obviously, when I talk biogas, it's green. So I need also to have a methanization chain in place. And I could tell you to do half of the depot of RATP with green biogas, it's a fucking challenges. And we are on it. But for hydrogen, the regulation will be key, because when I look at the pile of regulation that I have in order to convert simply in electric or in biogas, I could tell you for hydrogen, it will be super heavy. So it's part of also our business to make the things concrete and to be sure that these regulation will really offer us the ability to move on. I just want to mention, because I want to say hello to Andy, that in 2022, RATP Dev, my subsidiary of development in France and abroad, will be the first partner of TfL in terms of electrification of depot and bus in London, because we have 1,200 bus there and 5 depots, and we will be already 1/4 electric in 2022, and we are very proud of that. We are not doing this only in Paris. We are doing this also in other capitals in the world, and I think it's important that we spread this know-how that we have acquired in Paris in other cities. And so I'm really a believer that also PTC, second idea that I want to throw it in the debate, need to have a better reward for their external positive, externalities, because it is not the case today. It is not the case. These positive externalities are not sufficiently tracked. They are not sufficiently taken into account in the equation, the global equation, notably for the financing. And I could tell you, PTC have a super positive externalities. So we need to work on that as a profession, I would say, in order to defend that, because for the future investment, notably in transport system, I think it's important. I just keep you one example, and after I close. When we open the line 14 in the north of Paris in December, since the starting point of the project, the real estate price increased by 25%. And guess what? 0 penny, 0 franc, 0 euro, 0 whatever came back into the financing of the transport system. Everything was taken by the other player. So I know that in Singapore, in London, they have a kind of land value capture system which allows, for instance, Crossrail to be partly financed by some, let's say, additional tax. It's the same in Singapore. I think that in a country where we have so big problem in terms of financing the PTC, we need to think about that, because when we create new infra, we in fact deliver a huge value creation in the system. And it is not normal that €0 came back into the system in order to modernize again and we could create a very virtuous circle doing that. And we need to be inspired by what happened in London, in Singapore. It's a message for the French.
Thanks for that. And I think we've got Andy back with us. Andy, perhaps you could give us a few thoughts on the investment in infrastructure and the need for transport to link into other sectors in a way that it perhaps hasn't before.
Yeah, sure. Well, picking up on what Catherine was just saying, I'll talk about Crossrail, soon to be the Elizabeth line, and also the Northern Line extension. So I'll start with the latter. The Northern Line extension is a 2-station extension of the Northern Line down to what was formerly, there used to be there is a very iconic ex-power station down there, but it was pretty much a wasteland around there. And working with developers, we have built a stunning 2-station extension down to Battersea, and in doing so, created 25,000 new homes and 20,000 new jobs. And again, it didn't actually cost the central government a penny, because we did it through very imaginative financing with the developer, who understood that there's a symbiotic relationship there, that the Northern Line extension wouldn't have happened without the development, but the development wouldn't have happened without the Northern Line extension. You need both to go hand in hand. We're doing something similar at the moment out in East London, a place called Barking Riverside. Again, a bit of a desolate wasteland at the moment, but the same positive benefits accrue. And for the Elizabeth line, which is a much bigger entity, a brand new line akin to the RER, going right through the centre of London, connecting east, way out east of London to Heathrow and Reading in the west. Beautiful, 10 new stations in the middle. We're in trial operations at the moment. But again, that was built, as Catherine rightly said, with very imaginative funding that was predicated and secured via capturing the future property uplift and land price uplift that the line would generate. And that's been hugely successful. In attracting that investment in the first place to make the project viable. But B, also, as you go along the line, the soon to be opened line, you can already see businesses sprouting up, new housing estates. It really is yet another example on top of all of the others, and Line 14 in Paris, of the regenerative impact of transport and how it makes compelling sense, which is why I'm making this big pitch to government that, yes, we're another draw on the exchequer, we'll need some help with capital, but we will pay that back multiple times over in what the projects develop and deliver for the exchequer. So to me, it makes compelling sense.
Great, thanks, Andy. And I think, from an energy perspective and looking at it from where you sit, is this about the deployment of existing business models, or is this actually about we need to develop new business models to get mobility rolled out at scale? I
think it's probably a bit of both. Because I'm sorry, the question wasn't to me. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say that actually in terms of business model, I love the idea that Catherine and you were talking about this whole idea of capturing all the external, all the positive externalities that are created by these mobility projects. It is something that we need to think about. So in our sector, what we see is that Catherine was touching upon it. We think that the public sector should really define the framework for decarbonization in a much simpler way to really help in terms of regulation, provide the right type of regulation, because today, as Catherine was saying, it is a nightmare. The public sector also needs to align all the agendas on a common timeline. We need to have the whole ecosystem move at the right pace, at the same pace, and understand when they have to be all ready. Because this is the only way for all of us to do the right investments with the right timing to be able to get there. And today, we're kind of all in a wait-and-see position where we're thinking, maybe it's a bit too early now. Today, it's too expensive. I know I'm going to lose a lot of money if I invest in this. And I actually don't really know when it's going to peak. So really trying to set this common agenda and this common timeline, it would be a huge positive thing from the public sector. And then through subsidies, because today we really need to shorten the time frame of all these investments in order to reach break even. We think that the public push should enable to really shorten it by 2. We need these investments to reach break even, maybe around after 10 years or something like that, for us to be really able to invest in it. Otherwise, it's too risky. It's too difficult for us as private actors to do so. And so we believe that one smart business model is the public-private partnership scheme, where the public sector provides this whole ecosystem, this whole context, this regulation, and guarantees part of the revenue, and where the public actor comes with its expertise, its industrial knowledge, know-how, its innovation, and designs, builds, finances as well, because the public sector doesn't always have all the financing up front. Finances, operates, owns the whole thing. And I think this is a smart way of really accelerating this. And then in terms of also what the private sector could do and what we need to do, apart from this new, this PPP and concession type of business models, we should also work a lot more in a collaborative manner between the different private actors. This investment, for example, in hydrogen, is going to be so massive that we can't do it alone. It's too risky for us. So we need to really pull together, and it's some things that we really do. For example, with Total, we're working on hydrogen production in the south of France together in order to share the cost, share the risk. This is really something we need to do. And also across sectors. So for EV charging or for batteries, with ENGIE is working on EV charging infrastructure with Mercedes, with Stellantis. On aviation, we're talking with Safran, with Airbus. On maritime transport, with CMA-CGM. So the idea is we need to think cross-sector, because this is the only way, if we have this ecosystem approach, that we're going to be able to tackle this huge challenge.
Great, thank you. And I think, Catherine, you've obviously at RATP found a way at least to make some of the business cases stack up. And so I'd be interested in your views on kind of business models and some of the things that Anne-Laure was talking about the role of the private sector and different potential business models that might help us accelerate towards sustainable mobility.
Yeah, I think what we have decided to do, because we are entering in the competition mode in Paris, we are already in competition in France and in the 14 countries and the 4 continents where we are. We are in 470 cities. So Paris is the big one, but it's one amongst the other. And what we have decided to do is and I think it's really important that we have the know-how, as you said, to do this, is to encapsulate it in one business unit called Solution Ville, a city solution, all the know that we have in the group. And I could tell you is huge, because we have real estate know, we have program, and we have decided to open our, let's say, our field to partners. So you talk about ecosystem and to field into the ecosystem. We partner, for instance, with Woodeum, which is a specialist in building in wood. And we have projects with them, but also with Cogedim, also with Link City. So we develop a real estate business inside RATP Group. Then we develop the new mobility. Obviously, it's for us it's a must-have, because we have the backbone with the PTC and the new mobility around. So this one is very natural. Another one, which is more interesting, is on the way we intensively use our assets. I could just take this example. It's urban logistics. We have decided, due to the fact that we have all this bus depot in the core of the region, to get some tender for offer, and Amazon, Chronopost, some others come during the day when the bus are out and utilize our bus depot in order to do the last kilometer delivery, fully electric, obviously. So it's a kind of intensive utilization of our assets that we are trying to get there. And then also another one is connectivity. I want to mention that because we have a very nice subsidiary called RATP Connect. It is not well known, but now it's starting to be known because we have won a very important contract. We will do all the internet haut débit of the Grand Paris system. We won this contract in front of operator of telecom. It's a $500 million contract. And we operate fiber already in the metro, and we will continue to do this on the new 200 kilometers of metro built in Paris. It's a 36 billion investment, by the way, done by Société du Grand Paris, and we are obviously working for them in the line 14, notably. And I think it's really important for us because we see us during the crisis. One of the good things, we work on our raison d'être, and our purpose, and we have decided to go for engage every day for a better quality of life in city. And I think RATP Group have all this know encapsulated, and it's a new business model that we are developing, but based on very strong and rational abilities that we have in the group. And this, obviously, it's a new entrepreneurial adventure for the group, and I'm pretty confident about it. It's a decade in front of us in order to build what we want to build, but it's starting pretty well. And we partner with Engie, by the way, on a very important contract that maybe one day we could release. I say that because I know that I cannot speak about it, except the fact that we have the pleasure to work together. And so we will continue that way. And I think it's important because we doing this type of activity, in fact, we are at the core of the cities, and as you. And I think I really love the idea of the ecosystem. We are working in an ecosystem in order to have a demonstrator of urban flight, a taxi for the Olympic Games, and it's an ecosystem games. We are working with academics, big corporate, obviously, like Airbus. We run this with Choose Paris Region and ADP. And I think it's a collaborative way also to think the cities and the mobility. And it is the spirit of the group to partner with public, but also big corporate like Engie. And we love that.
Thank you, Catherine. And I think, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today, but good to end on a positive note about the potential of partnerships and innovation in this space. I'll just finish by thanking our panel for taking the time, and thank you everyone for being with us and bearing with us through some of the tech issues as we try out hybrid conferences. So thanks very much.